Welcome and good afternoon. We are here live from DC, I should say. And today we're going to be speaking and focusing on growing challenges in cybersecurity. The event organized by the Center for Careers and Internships, Middlebury Professional Network, in collaboration with Middlebury in DC, the Rohatyn Center for Global Affairs, and the Cyber Collaborative. We want to bring the fresh discussion on the newest challenges in digital space when it comes to security, both on a personal, national, as well as international level. I will work as a host today, and my name is Robert Siudak, and I'm visiting fellow at the Cyber Collaborative, which is a hub for especially cybersecurity related activities on Middlebury Monterey campus. Every good panel on cybersecurity or every good discussion on cybersecurity usually starts with a lot of numbers, threatening numbers about how many not secured IoT devices are there, how many botnets are there, how many malwares are created every day. To be honest, that was my initial plan as well for our today's event, but then the Friday happened, and then the Monday happened. So on Friday, on Friday on Florida, in one of the county, city water treatment, Oldsmar City, has been hacked. City water treatment, which serves more than 15,000 residents usually. And what happened? The hacker itself has been able digitally to change the amount of chemical, sodium hydroxide, by a factor of more than 100. Generally, it's not good, but that was on the Friday. Then the Monday happened, and if you ever played Witcher or Cyberpunk 2077, you know the CD Projekt Red game producer. They have been hacked as well, and that's only 4 days during the last weekend. So when it comes to, during the last week, when it comes to CD Projekt Red, they have been both hacked. Their source code of their games have been leaked, but most probably, but as well, part of the data has been ransomware. We will discuss what does it mean, in fact, all of these strange names that I mentioned. The question would be, what other challenges are there and how we should face them, as well as what kind of market and professional encounters we might and should have with cybersecurity. Our two main objectives would be today to provide an overview of the cybersecurity landscape. That's the first one. I already a little bit mentioned about that. But the second one would be also to provide you, students, our audience, with the insight, the advice of, for those of you who might be already interested in pursuing career in cybersecurity, or who just want to know whether it's something that is for you. Our today's meeting will be structured in two parts. The first segment is the conversation among our experts, among our panelists. I will introduce them in a second. The second part, the second segment, is the questions from a panel of students, pre-selected panel of students. Questions focus especially on career paths in cybersecurity and in digital security generally. So today we're gonna have, and I'm really happy to, as a host, to have such a great panel of experts with I would say, variety of experiences from all around the private, public, third sector when it comes to cybersecurity. Let me introduce you to all three speakers now. The first one is Mia Little from 2007 cohort in Middlebury. She's currently working as a cybersecurity attorney at Digital Crimes Unit at Microsoft, but also previously has a lot of experience, first and foremost, as a fellow and at the New American with Google, where she focused on privacy and government and surveillance law. But also she worked as a legal fellow with the US Department of Justice and Office of the Director of the National Intelligence. Last but not least, she also worked in the US Department of Defense, where she served as a digital network analyst. I would maybe ask every of our speakers now, our panelists, to maybe describe in the beginning, just for the introduction, in one short sentence, what was the decisive moment in your career, that moment, event, situation that convinced you that you want to pursue a career in cybersecurity, you want to do this?
Are you starting with me? I made that decision because technology touched everything I did growing up, and I had a desire to feel safe while leveraging that technology.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move to our second speaker, Elias Sugarman from 2002 cohort. He's currently director of the cyber initiative at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, but he has a lot of previous experience as a consultant and strategist to both private sector as well as non-profits. But also he served as a foreign affairs officer at the US State Department. When it comes to current activities, Elia is also part of the executive board of the Cyber Peace Initiative. We might have a few seconds to think about to speak about the Cyber Peace Initiative itself in a second, but also independent advisor to a committee of the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism. Elia, what was the situation, the issue that pushed you into cybersecurity?
Thanks, Robert. I think what motivated me the most was probably a conversation with my wife, who's a lawyer at Google, just about where technology is going, much like what Mia said, and how it touches our lives. And that mixed with my interest in foreign affairs, which I pursued at Middlebury, led me to identify this as sort of the next big horizon of issues that really I wanted to dive into.
Thank you. And last but not least, we move to Adam Markun from 2017 cohort. He's currently working as a security analyst at FireEye, one of the leading cybersecurity company. Previously also worked as a digital forensic and incident response consultant for different companies. Adam, what made you start the career in this not really easy technical part of cybersecurity domain?
I would probably have to say it's nothing that crazy. I was taking a class on computer architecture, implemented a buffer overflow attack, and just thought it was really cool and interesting, and that kind of started me on the path. And obviously, you know, like the other two panelists said, it touches everything, and it's very impactful. So that definitely adds to the motivation.
Great. Thank you for that. Now we will move to our first segment, first part of today's evening. We will have a panel focus on three, I would say, parts. For those of you who are new to the cybersecurity, I think it will be really worth noting to focus on what is happening in cyberspace. So what kind of challenges we are facing, that will be the first part. Also, the second part, who, which means like what is the multi-stakeholder landscape there, private, public, and who is doing the good job and who has to still work better in order to secure the cyberspace. And the third part would be focus on how, which means like we will try to focus on speaking from 2021 perspective, 2021 perspective, what is the future of cybersecurity and how we might work as cybersecurity professionals to make it better when it comes to security in digital domain. Before I will ask first question, I will also mention that as in every academic or general discussion, our today's discussion will not focus on any attempts to attribute any attacks or issues which are still, and in a lot of instances, under considerations of both private as well as public bodies. So it's open, I should say, scientific or professional discussion without aim of attributing or putting a list of specific parts who might be taking part in malicious activities in cyberspace. That said, the second point, which is also important to mention, is that, of course, our great panelists have, as I mentioned, and as you've seen, a lot of experience through a lot of institutions, companies, but of course, today they will be presenting their own personal views, and that's the manner that we invited them, and they will be speaking today in the panel. Okay, so having said that, let's jump directly to our first topic, which hopefully will help us to better understand the challenge of cybersecurity itself. So nowadays, cybersecurity means a lot of things. So we hear this from IT engineers, we hear cybersecurity discussions from civil rights lawyers, but also from the US president. Maybe the first question will go to Elia. From your perspective, taking into account both the current threats, what is happening, as well as the current countermeasures that are in place, that we are still working to put them in action. In which domain, in which area of cybersecurity we still have to do the most? So still there is the biggest challenge there, if you would have to say from your perspective.
Well, I'd say there's a lot of work to be done in all arenas of cyber, but sort of taking a step back, I think my vantage point at the Hewlett Foundation was a pretty unique one, because the Hewlett Foundation is the family foundation of William and Flora Hewlett and their family of Hewlett-Packard fame, right? So it's a philanthropy that has a charitable purpose. And so we have a grant-making program focused on cybersecurity and internet policy for reasons that'll be responsive to your question, which is that cybersecurity can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. But at the end of the day, I think there are sort of two ways to think about it. It is both a horizontal layer that touches all aspects of our lives. That is that digital technologies are a key part of our lives. They drive the economy, but that there are different challenges to securing them because it's a mix of technology and people using them. And there are flaws in both, more oftentimes in the way that people use them or the way they're designed to be used by people. And so that's sort of like a horizontal layer that cuts across everything, whether you care about the environment or public health. Just pick any vertical, cybersecurity intersects it. Cybersecurity is also a vertical unto itself, right? Especially in more traditional notions of how do I secure my data, my infrastructure? How do I prevent others from compromising it, from accessing it? And so if you think about it that way, it's a problem that's important to everybody in society. And so as a philanthropy, the Hewlett Foundation was basically saying, this is a really important area for mid-kids, for everybody to focus on, because it's one of those top 3, top 5 existential challenges that we as a world, as a society, need to grapple with. How do we want to think about securing all of those systems that matter to us without undermining our other values, at least those values that in democracies we hold dear, different notions of civil liberties and privacy, different notions of innovation, competitive, economic competition and the like, and different notions of security, national and public. And so just to say, all of those interesting values are packed into cybersecurity. And you can see that in the debate about how to regulate encryption. The topic you just talked about, how people try to hack critical infrastructure that were covered extensively in Nicole Perlroth's new book from the New York Times. And so I think as a former philanthropist working on these issues, I think the thing that I would make the case for is cybersecurity is neither a technical issue, neither just a policy issue, neither just a legal issue or a business issue. It's all of the above. And that's why it's so interesting and so compelling, because I think there are roles for every sector of society and segment to play its role. And what we need to do is identify what the strategy is to do that. And so I think it all starts with communication, which is why panels like this matter, because all too often cybersecurity is scary. It's being hacked and attacked by hooded people sitting behind keyboards. And we need to find a better way to communicate. And so one of the coolest projects we did at the Hewlett Foundation was fund a global contest to reimagine how do you visually depict cybersecurity. That is, if you do a Google image search for cyber, and if you want to get a good chuckle, do it right now, and you'll see just a host of just garbage images. It's literally white men in hoodies hunched over keyboards. It's server racks. It is fear-mongering nonsense that in no way gets at why this stuff matters. And so we now have openly shared website, cybervisuals.org, if anybody wants to check it out, where you can download better images that are more diverse and inclusive and educational to try to show why these issues matter. So let me stop there.
From my perspective, I just want to mention to our attendees that, as you see, none of us has a hoodie, which tells, even Adam, who is technical, tech guy in the room. Thank you for that, Elia. So you mentioned a lot of topics, in fact, and maybe I will follow up on that, because so in short, if if I'm a student, I'm pretty new to digital security, but I'm already know that, yeah, cybersecurity is something that I have to understand better to secure. And the second question is, where should I focus in the first, I would say, in the first minute? Maybe me or Adam, we should be more afraid about our bank accounts, maybe critical infrastructure, and I should ask my county or my city what they are doing about this. Or maybe I should first think about my data privacy, or any other issue that came into your mind.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say first you need to worry about what you can actually control. So whether it's multi-factor authentication and not reusing your own passwords and being careful about what you post online. I would worry about that first because there are folks who get paid a lot more money to do the other stuff, deal with like critical infrastructure and cyber warfare. But we need to get the basics down first.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, especially if you're speaking from like a personal perspective or an individual perspective. Obviously, if you're coming from, I guess, speaking from the perspective of working for a security company, I mean, I would be personally more worried about critical infrastructure. I think it's hard to kind of, especially with cyber insurance becoming more of a common thing. If you're comparing like monetary loss towards the loss of life that can happen due to a breach of critical infrastructure, it's I don't know. I think it's hard to compare those two. That being said, as Mia said, if you're there's not much that the everyday person can do about defending critical infrastructure. So it's kind of not something I would say that you should worry about or overly plan for. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all of you for all the questions. So so not speaking from personal perspective, so to maybe close this part on what, because more or less I think we already understand that there are different layers, but as well it's a layer itself. Maybe we might try to sketch kind of a map of main cyber challenges. So pick one from your perspective as a when it comes to the United States in 2021 and cybersecurity, widely discussed and understood in broad terms. What will be the top one on the list for you?
I mean, I'll start with the slightly vague one of lack of understanding and sophisticated decision making. And by that, what I mean is cybersecurity in the policy arena, on Capitol Hill, in the executive branch, otherwise in the judiciary, is still a relatively nascent area. And so you don't have 30 years of expertise that senior decision makers acquired at university and master's programs working, and they came up in their career. So it's a relatively new thing that's just been like bolted on and added on to their roles. I don't mean to say there aren't really talented cyber people who are more technical, more practitioner oriented, or even do know the policy, but at scale, all you need to do is watch a congressional hearing and understand that there's a fundamental lack of understanding at the senior most levels of decision making in the US government about cybersecurity, even how to talk about it, let alone how to solve it. And so I think that there's a major challenge just about understanding and accessing knowledge and making this something that people feel they need to understand and take ownership of, as opposed to say, whoa, it's scary, I can't understand that, go bring in the techies to fix it. If we deal with it that way, we're never actually going to get the nuanced solutions we need to figure out the right balance between protecting the country and projecting power and dealing with nation state adversaries and APTs, helping companies not be too intrusive, but still deliver products that we use, that our parents use, that our families use. And really thinking about what it means to sort of like want our democracy to survive in a digital age that amplifies a lot of these threat vectors. And so I think that is a bit of a vague answer, but I think it's one that doesn't get enough attention. And I like to go there because it goes to, there's a role for the private sector to play. There's a role for government. There's a role for universities. There's a role for civil society. And that's sort of the way I think about it. And it's sort of, if we don't think about it that way, and we try to just pin it into one little narrow vertical, I'm afraid we're never going to actually solve any of these problems.
Yeah, well said. I agree.
I think it will be interesting. I don't know, coming from a technical perspective, I would say that if we just rely on the technical aspects, I don't see much of like an end in sight, so to speak. It's just an arms race basically of attackers, creating new malware, devising new ways to breach systems, and then we're catching them and figuring out. So I actually think perhaps the biggest challenge will be how are we deciding how we're gonna, as a nation, and then also as a global community, how we're gonna deal with this diplomatically, or if we are gonna treat it like that, or if we're just gonna rely on technology. And that's something that I don't know much about. I mean, I'm just speaking from the technical perspective, but I do feel like in the long run, that will have more of an impact in terms of potentially deferring attacks instead of trying to catch them as they're happening and recover from them.
Great, thank you very much. We'll move to the second part, but I'm pretty sure, and I hope that one of our attendees, there are at least 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 of them who will end up as decision makers, senators, congressmen. And if we're gonna have similar discussion in 10, 15 years, the challenge that Elia mentioned will be already partly thanks to this discussion as well. I would say maybe not solved, but at least will be in the process of solving. Adam mentioned about the roles of different, both national, but as well international actors when it comes to solving those puzzles that we are discussing here. So now in the second part, we would like to focus on different roles of different stakeholders, who is playing well and who still needs to bring more to the table. So if we look at the role of public and private sector actors, companies, federal and local government, users, etc. Maybe this question will go to Mia. In your opinion, who is the worst student in the class so far? Speaking generally, of course, not like a one or second example, but generally, if we try to catch this dynamic, who is still lagging behind a bit?
I hate to blame users again, but users and probably the government to an extent. And what I mean by that is sometimes when there is an attack or there's an exploitation of a vulnerability, you find out later it was because there wasn't a password change, or that an organization like Microsoft pushed out a fix, like a patch, and no one actually applied it, right? No one wants to restart their computer. And so you didn't do the thing we intended you to do to prevent the issue that occurred. And that's problematic. You can look at the saturation across the market and be like, okay, this company, only 30% of people who work there actually took the patch. Most users just didn't care until it's like a forced reboot or whatever. And I think you need to see it, I guess, in my office, we talk about red team and blue team. There's offensive and defensive. And offensive only needs to find one vulnerability to get in there. And defensive, you need to be like ironclad and patched all up. So it's going to be easier if you're on the offensive side. So we need to do the bare minimum is like just a patch. And so that's why I would see it as users, or at least companies and schools and stuff that do have the ability to patch, but just won't.
Yeah, Elia, want to jump?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that state and local governments are obviously struggling, right? Much like small and medium enterprises are, because it's largely a resource question and an incentive question. And so, Microsoft and some bigger providers have done a much better job of making security easier and more usable. But still, a lot of places just don't have enough people with enough expertise to actually secure their systems and sort of understand risk, and then get themselves invest enough money in a way that mitigates that risk, right, in a reasonable way. And so I think that you see ransomware hitting a lot of state and local governments for very good reason. They're not using, the newest systems with multi-factor and other safeguards put in place, and they're easy targets, right? And the same for small and medium-sized enterprises, whether it's business email compromise or other specific vectors of defrauding them or holding their data for ransom. I think those two groups share a common attribute in that they've limited resources, and it's good quality cyber people generally are not, there aren't a ton of them, and there definitely aren't enough of them to work for all of the small and medium-sized enterprises and state and local governments all around the country. People are doing better, especially with elections and some things, but still it's a lot of work left to be done.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we're going to have time to speak about cybersecurity experts shortage globally, not only in the US or in a specific country, especially in the second part. Here, Adam a little bit mentioned or touched upon the topic of international. Let's go global in this case and ask the question, maybe somehow combining it also with the change in US administration. So in fact, we see a lot of important urgent priorities on the list of the new administration when it comes to international agenda of the new US administration and collaboration with different partners. How do you see the, I would say, governing of the cyberspace nowadays? What are the next steps that should happen, need happen, and what role might US administration play in this process?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in if nobody else wants to. I mean, I think it stands to reason that the new administration will be more globally engaged, right, and will be more open and transparent and try to collaborate with like-minded countries and allies to manage shared threats, right? I think that there are lots of global processes to talk about cybersecurity. There's international norms at the UN Group of Governmental Experts, the UNGGE. There are regional discussions that happen in Europe, in Latin America through the Organization of American States, the African Union, so on and so forth. And I would imagine that the administration is just going to be much more plugged into that, wanting to leverage the international system to try to create a more robust rule set that limits harmful conduct by dangerous states, rogue states, criminal actors, and the like. I've been heartened to see the very high quality people that have been appointed to senior cyber roles in the US government and the new administration, many of them who have a long history of international engagement, because these are not American issues that stop at US borders. Like, they're definitionally global. One role I'm keenly interested to see who they appoint and how this shakes is the State Department is in the process of creating a new bureau to handle cyber and digital economy issues. And it's not exactly clear what's happening with it because something happened at the end of the Trump administration, but then Congress didn't like that. And so it's being reviewed. But in theory, it'll shake out where there'll be a new senior person at the State Department who is empowered to deal with those issues holistically. And I think that person will play a key role trying to set what is that international strategy? How does one engage when it comes to law enforcement, negotiation of norms, different things at the UN? So I think we'll see more of that, in a few months' time. It's just, it's important. It's not sort of like the day one priority in terms of the Biden-Harris cybersecurity efforts, because there are more pressing things, but I do think you'll see them put in a lot of time and make it a real priority later in the year.
Okay. Thank you for that. I think the time is pressing, and for the last part, we will move already to our how question, which means like being in 2021, let's for a second think about the future, but also about the lessons for a future that we might, I would say, and we should learn from our own mistakes. So maybe let's start with the attack. If some of you is following the cybersecurity newspapers and generally the discussion in the industry, you heard about the SolarWinds attack. I'm now speaking about. I'm now speaking to our attendees. Maybe Adam, this will be the question for you, because the breach that we are discussing now, the SolarWinds, in fact, targeted everyone, private, public, American, Polish, everyone who's been using the software itself. What are the lessons here for the future? How did this happen? And what we can do for the future to not have this same discussion one more time?
Well, it will happen again, probably, unfortunately. But the lessons we can learn is, I think a major one is don't trust anything. A lot of cybersecurity is based on relying on, it's pattern matching and looking for what looks suspicious, and also relying on the fact that most attackers are pretty lazy, and if they can get away with something, they don't really, if they can steal something and hide their identity, they're not going to worry about the fact that, whoever they stole it from knows that something was taken from them. So in this case, that wasn't true, and they utilized software that was trusted, which a lot of times, like as an analyst, if you're looking through something and you see something that looks maybe suspicious, but it's from a signed like Microsoft executable or something, you're gonna like not treat it as seriously because it's like, okay, there's no chance that Microsoft is compromised. But I think as we've seen, not to use Microsoft as an example, it's just common in the cybersecurity world, but I think the lesson is don't trust anything and know where your responsibilities lie when you're using like software as a service or infrastructure as a service, and go above and beyond what you think you need to do. And there's a concept called like defense in depth, which is basically kind of approaching a problem from assuming that, approaching your security posture from the position of like, I'm already breached, and what can I do to prevent the attacker from getting what they want, or what can I do to make it as hard as possible for them to take what they want. So it's implementing, it's having a firewall, it's having intrusion detection system, it's having two-factor, having security analysts just at every step of the way.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. You mentioned one of the I would say technique, or one of the kind of I would say logic of the security processes inside the organization. Maybe quick, but I think not so easy question, because of course breaching someone or some organization or system is not like this. It's not happening in a second. It's the whole process of breaching, taking out their information, money, or whatever. From your perspective, if you will have to say where we, as the ones who might be on the other side, the ones who are breached, where we should focus our attention on the prevention, detection, intervention when something happens, remediation after all, or recovery. It's a general question, but I think it's also important for a lot of our audiences to understand that it's not always about building the wall. What other, apart from building the walls, we might do in cybersecurity work?
I think as an individual, and I don't want to say there's not much you can do, but I think it's being like cyber literate, and I think Eli touched on before how it's scary to a lot of people, and I think if people actually took the time to start reading articles about it, they'd find that it's not as scary as it looks, and that even if they don't understand everything, they'll start to pick up pieces here and there, and they'll be able to, they might, because of that, they might see something a little suspicious or, on their network or something, and then they'll report it. So I think it's being smart. Don't click on phishing links. If you see a phishing link, report it because someone else might click on it. Don't plug in USBs that you find on the floor. Just knowing how attackers can get in will make you more conscious about maybe your like day-to-day tasks and whether something's normal or should be reported.
Yeah, and just to add to that, like I think people have to fundamentally change the way they think, because at least, in many parts of the US, for instance, and I realize this isn't the case everywhere, there's a sort of layered security to keep you safe, right? It's you lock your doors and windows, but then like people are looking around the neighborhood and may let you know if something is happening that shouldn't. There's the police who's there, who's both proactively policing and then responding if something happens. And then you have, higher government authorities protecting from foreign invasion, basically, right? Those distinctions and layers are much more complicated and break down in certain respects on the internet, because, somebody can be literally halfway around the world peering into your house through an internet-enabled device and stealing your banking information as you log onto a computer, right? And if that happens, there's basically no recourse. Like, you can report it to the police, nothing's going to happen. You can even try to report it to the FBI, and odds are they have so many thousands and thousands of cases where many, many more dollars are impacted, like nothing is ever going to happen to help you. And so there isn't really anybody other than, largely major companies who you're entrusting with your data to actually try to keep you safe. And so just personally, right, like I use Gmail. My wife happens to be a lawyer at Google, just to disclose that. But like I have, all of the security features that I could possibly turn on with like the literal security key as a second factor, not my cell phone, and like nobody is ever going to phish me. It's basically impossible. If I do everything right, it's basically impossible for somebody to do that now, unless they're a really, 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 really fancy government who for some reason really, really, really wants to target me, which odds are that's not going to happen. So I think like it's hard to explain that to people without scaring them. And so the best easy thing is yeah, you do best practice. You rely on top tier providers like Microsoft and Google and others who have world-class teams of security engineers like Adam and others, literally just making sure that you are safe all day long. And then hopefully at some point, the government will find a better way to try to defend people at scale than it's doing, because right now it can't even defend itself, right? Like the fact that the most sensitive US capabilities from the NSA and others have been stolen and published online, and the CIA and elsewhere, and it's still not exactly known what happened or who did that, like is highly problematic, right? And that just goes to show that if some physical thing that were literally the crown jewels of the United States were physically stolen from within like Fort Knox, right, to use a stupid analogy, you better believe that there would be the biggest investigation we've ever heard, and it would be the front page news like every day for a decade until it's solved. Like it's just, these analogies break down, but it's also then hard to sort of explain it to people without relying on them. So yeah, I just think that it's tricky, but just to sort of echo what Adam said.
Great, and thank you for all the discussion. Maybe I will close it with a short question about the other technologies, the edge technologies that are now introduced to the market, to the world. And of course, they should bring, and they are already bringing a lot of potential to a lot of sectors, including healthcare and others. But also, of course, like cybersecurity professionals, we always think about risk posture, what kind of risk they might also give us. So from your perspective, which, I don't know, IoT, industrial IoT, quantum, or other technology, which will change the way how we use digital technologies in the next 5, 10, 15 years, which one we should be also a lot more cautious about the risk that it might bring to the table?
So I don't know much about quantum computing. I feel like that's still pretty new, but I would say with regard to IoT devices, the more interoperability you have between devices and companies, the more, like, the higher risk there is for vulnerabilities, right? We're trying to make things work and make them work smoothly. So there's lots of information sharing and who knows what's happening. And that's just my hunch. I don't work in IoT, but like, that's what I'm guessing where your bigger vulnerabilities would be.
I think to build off of that, specifically industrial IoT really worries me, because on top of what Mia just said, a lot of times, if you have like an industrial control system, you can't really turn it off to update it. I mean, there are ways to get around that, obviously, but a lot of times they're running very old software that's very vulnerable. And if you mix that with, increased surface, like just IoT, if they're connected to more things, they're way more vulnerable, and then they're critical. So that's scary.
Yeah, and then I would just sort of caution skepticism when somebody says this new technology is radically going to transform everything overnight. Like I tend to think those claims are widely, like, severely overblown. Whether it's blockchain, like if you hear somebody who's talking about something and they use blockchain, unsupervised machine learning, AI, plus whatever, the more things you string together, I would argue the less they understand what they're talking about. And so I do think there are potential consequences and impacts of all these technologies. I think like the most immediate one that creates interesting questions for cybersecurity and cybersecurity risk is more so just like the cloud, which is a term that's sort of helpful to use. But just sort of like that type of off-premises shared computing that just brings a ton more computing capability that then in turn powers these, hungry systems and really intensive algorithms that do a lot of good things and can also do harm. I think the systemic risk from like basically putting everything that everybody stores on Microsoft, Amazon, and maybe Google or one or two other cloud providers is just like, that creates a whole interesting suite of issues in terms of cyber offense, defense, risk at scale, the financial system, all that stuff that doesn't get nearly enough attention, but is fascinating and is like the biggest growth business or one of them for these major companies. So it's also like a real high priority for them. And you have interesting tensions between revenue, security, usability that go back to sort of earlier iterations of technology that I think is just something to keep an eye on. So I tend to find like discussions of the cloud quite interesting and sort of like in the moment, but still evolving as opposed to sort of like 10 or 15 years off.
Okay. Thank you very much for all the great insights during all the discussion. We will be wrapping up, and I would maybe follow up on Adam's note regarding the industrial IoT. Indeed, I hope none of our attendees are using Windows XP to watch the webinar, but at the same time, I'm pretty sure in many cases, the power plant that is powering your computer might be using this system. So that shows a lot of problems when it comes to updating systems, for example, for industrial IoT. Now we'll move to our second part, which is focused on questions and answers, questions from our prearranged panel of students. Now I will want to invite them as well to discuss the cyber-related career opportunities. We all know that cybersecurity here in the panel, we all know, but generally it's also widely described as one of the greatest challenges for cybersecurity is the shortage of people, shortage of experts, whether you speak about technological experts, whether you speak about lawyers, decision makers, policy makers, but also even marketing managers and other parts of the whole process of making sector thriving. It's not only US, German, English, or any other country case, it's a global challenge. The question is whether both we are able to do something systematically, but also the question more personally for our attendees would be how to be the part of the solution when it comes to this questions. The first students who I want to introduce would be Zoela Ellis. She is a student of the International and Global Studies with a focus in global security studies. The second student will be Noelle Zeski. She is an MA student on counterterrorism and non-proliferation here, where I'm speaking from at Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. She's also the president of the Women in International Security. Hey. The third student would be the Erika Nakagawa. She is the tech in the room, working on and studying computer science. Hello, Erika.
Hello.
Hey, the last but not least, Laura Payton, MA on non-proliferation and terrorism studies, also here in Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, also president of the Cybersecurity Working Group.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for allowing us to be here with you guys and join in this webinar.
Great. Let's jump to the question that already a little bit we have a flavor of that from Zoe about Zoom and other services.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. So I was just continuing on my question. I was just wondering, because so many people are using Zoom and other digital platforms during the pandemic to remain home, do you recommend any sources for students specifically, such as like blogs, podcasts, or any other sources that students can use to remain more informed on the constantly evolving field of cybersecurity? So I'd love to hear more on that. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in and feel that I'm talking too much, but there's a great podcast called Risky Business that's based out of Australia by a really entertaining host named Patrick Gray, and I think it's a really good podcast. It does a great job of sort of taking the high-level developments, breaches, hacks, compromises, plus policy, law, and business developments in a pretty accessible way. It can get a little technical, but it's really engaging. It's every week. They also have a newsletter called Seriously Risky Business that is, I think, the best newsletter that gives a bit of analysis on top of the news to help students understand the landscape and to add a bit more analytical rigor as opposed to some of just the clippings ones that are just headlines. And so if you have limited time and you want some engaging, high quality content that involves leading policy, legal, technical folks, for my money, Risky Businesses is one of the best options. So that's what I would recommend to students. There are others too, but I don't want to drone on. So others should offer their favorites.
I would say in terms of technical, like if you want to get really technical, a lot of companies will release, they'll have blog posts, and then they'll also, release actual like white papers on a lot of incidents. So like Microsoft does a lot, FireEye, CrowdStrike, they all have, they all have great blog posts that are pretty consistent. And then I would also recommend Twitter. There are a lot of like big names, I would say, in cybersecurity. There's like people, So there's a ton. I could probably like make a list if you were interested. And they'll just post either thoughts or articles that they've read or new, vulnerabilities, new exploits, stuff like that. Again, kind of more technical because that's what I look at, but yeah.
Thank you very much. We will move to our second speaker, student. Noelle, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much also for having us and giving us such a great opportunity to reach out to professionals in the field. One of my questions is, there's a ton of us speaking from the MIIS perspective that are very interested in policy, and we maybe don't have such large, maybe technical proclivities, and some of us do, not to, say not everyone doesn't, but is there something that we can do or learn or put in our resume that would differentiate us from other applicants in the fields who are perhaps more policy-based and less technical-based?
I'll answer that one. I'd say I love writing samples when folks attach those and they actually show they can approach a common issue from outside of the box. They can think differently. I don't really care for like cookie cutter folks. So I love people who are just like out there. I mean, you always can take like a SANS course or like a CISSP certification. I actually don't have those. I did take the SANS course, but you don't need to have that as long as you're willing to learn. I would just say writing samples just to show that you can just view things from a different perspective.
Yeah, and I've had people on my team sort of audit or take technical classes at community colleges or universities just to sort of, again, demonstrate knowledge, help learn some basic concepts. Myself have taken some white hat hacking classes provided by different companies similar to SANS. They're of varying degrees of utility. One of the things we funded at the Hewlett Foundation, or we are funding, is actually the development of, like a, say, 4-day hands-on course to teach the technical basics of cybersecurity to law, policy, and others, because I do think that is a hole in the market right now. I don't think there's actually a sort of a remote option for that. There are a few schools like Stanford that have like a hands-on hacking class taught by Alex Stamos, the former CISO of Facebook. And as you might imagine, like that's a pretty in-demand, cool class at Stanford, but there aren't a lot of options like that. So it's also an area of need. And so it's one of those things that maybe there's a way for Middlebury, for MIIS, for sort of the different collaboratives at Middlebury to find a way to even sort of, come up with some sort of light touch technical training for interested, IP&E or other interested students, and happy to make connections in that space to those different institutions doing some of that stuff if that's ever of interest.
A real quick thing, for people at Middlebury College, Champlain College in Burlington is a really good cybersecurity school. I don't know, no one did it when I was there, but if there was a way to like take a class there because it's nearby, definitely look into that.
A lot of notes taken probably during this this answer. Okay, let's move to Erika in this case.
Hi, thank you again to all the panelists. This has been so informative and helpful. And my question sort of is gonna be going off of Noelle's, but coming from a CS background myself, I think Adam can best answer my question. And I just wanted to know what technical skills a student who already sort of has a technical background and is interested in becoming a cybersecurity analyst should focus on? Like, if there's any specific languages to learn or any projects to work on that you would recommend.
I could, yeah, I mean, I could give a long answer to this. Quickly, Python's really like mostly used by most security analysts. I don't know where to start. Definitely, if you message me afterward, or if anyone's interested, message me. I could send a long list of things. I would say, I think it's there are a lot of opportunities for people who aren't necessarily like don't have a ton of cybersecurity experience, and I think people like if companies are hiring out of college, they realize that, and they're looking more for people who are really willing to learn. Good writing skills are really important, which is something that I think Middlebury really helps with. So definitely emphasize those things. And for something more technical, I would definitely familiarize yourself with like networking and just understand like basic protocols. Like when you open up your browser and you type in google.com, like know what happens, like what a DNS request is, what happens after that, what a TCP handshake is. Yeah, so networking and writing, and be willing to learn.
Okay, great. Let's move to Laura.
Thank you, Robert. I'm going to approach this from a mid-career professional perspective, as that's where I am in my career, and maybe angle this towards more Mia or Eli for an answer, but definitely, Adam, if this seems relevant to you, please jump on in. Can you describe the job landscape vis-a-vis the intersection of cybersecurity and policy, and also to that, specifically with emphasis on nuclear nonproliferation, financially motivated cybercrimes, and issues in the counterterrorism space, as that this is those are our main focuses in the nonproliferation and terrorism program at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey. And if I may, a second part, and what kind of qualities or background experience or traits potential employers in this space look for in a mid-career hire? Thank you.
After you, Mia, you want to kick it off, or you want me to?
Oh, sure. So I'm a second career attorney, and I started at Microsoft as a security engineer. And I went to law school at night. And I feel like a lot of the program managers we hire have a natural curiosity to acquire more knowledge and skills in a variety of fields. And then from there, they're able to pivot. Even if you start as a PM, you can become an engineer, or you become an attorney, and you don't have to leave and come back, because anything you don't know, we can actually teach you in-house. And I feel like that's what we really look for when we hire, because not everyone has everything. And if anything, it's the person who has the different background. Like for lawyers at Microsoft, like I'm very different. Like I've been all like in the whole geek language and speaking with the engineers, and the lawyers don't like that so much. So I think anything you have to bring from your background definitely sets you apart, and you have to know how to sell it, right? Because they're like, oh, but you didn't go to a firm. I'm like, yeah, I didn't have to, but I do know how to speak the language those guys speak. And so I think whether you come in as like a PM or an engineer, you can always pivot around and move. And I think I just answered just the second part of your question, probably because I forgot the first part. But yeah, sorry.
So I'm happy to add into that, because I wish I had had a previous career as a security engineer. I'm just a non-practicing lawyer, so I got like less than half of what you do. But so I think there are government jobs, just to state the obvious, right? Like the Department of Energy has people who work on the nuclear arsenal and also sort of the security of it in both physical and sort of digital cybersecurity parameters, right? The intelligence community in the United States has multiple different units that care about those issues. CISA at the Department of Homeland Security cares about terrorism and cybersecurity. FBI cares about terrorism and cybersecurity. So just to say there's a wealth of federal government jobs. I'm not up to speed on what their hiring outlook is now, if there's a freeze, if there isn't. But I would imagine there are sort of established pipelines there, and some of them through some of the existing agencies that recruit from or have housed previous graduates from MIIS. I think Civil society is another great target, right? Like the Carnegie Endowment has obviously a robust nuclear program. They also have a robust cyber program that the Hewlett Foundation has funded. And some of the people there straddle those two domains, right? And so there are think tanks, there are university centers. And so it may be this sort of thing where if you want to message me offline, I'm happy to sort of give you a bit more granular on like individual think tanks and programs where they're going to have like, they're going to want, research analysts or fellows, and then, put you in wherever you fit in the hierarchy. But part of what the Hewlett Foundation and others have been doing is trying to build those types of research and policy roles outside of government and to some extent inside of government. So while there may not be thousands of them, there are pockets of them if you know where to look. So happy to help with that.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We still have 4 minutes, so I'm not sure we're gonna be able to have next round of questions, but I think we can have one last question. So, okay, the first come first serve, Noelle, you.
So as someone who's hoping to graduate in the next year, what is one critical error that applicants make during an interview that can kick them out of contention for any job, technical or policy based?
Oh my God, like my biggest pet peeve is people who don't read our website and do their homework. And so one is you call the Hewlett Foundation the Hewlett Packard Foundation. The Packard Foundation is a separate entity. We're very friendly with them, but like read the publicly available information. Like Microsoft's blog is awesome. If I were interviewing for a job anywhere near MIIS and Microsoft, like I would know that blog from the last 6 months inside and out, because like everybody from MIIS up to Brad Smith writes like kick-ass blog posts that are super informative. So that's like the easiest own goal to avoid in my mind.
Oh, I agree. And I would also say network a lot beforehand, because like if you want to reach out to me about Microsoft, I would help you with like our interview process and what that looks like to avoid that pit hole, like just to avoid the issue altogether. I haven't seen any complete like fails in interviews, but thank goodness, but yeah.
I would say, and this probably applies to anything, any type of interview, just don't, like, if you don't know something, don't like pretend like you know it, and then you don't want to be caught, acting like you lied or something. I think it's really important, especially because no one knows everything. It's important to be able to admit when you don't know something, and you can then say, you can speculate or something on that. So, don't lie, and then don't get frustrated if you don't know anything, and just be honest about it.
Thank you very much. I think that was the last answer. We have to be wrapping up the whole discussion. Thanks first and foremost to our great experts. Adam mentioned in the end, don't pretend you know something. Everyone here, even today, as we've seen, we don't have all the answers, but at least we know what kind of questions are there and where we have to work. Thank you very much for the great discussion, great insights. I think our attendees, our students, will probably, a lot of them will try also to follow up on a lot of issues and topics that I mentioned. Thanks to our panel of students. I hope the answers and that you received also have been the ones that you've been looking for. As a host, I would also like to invite everyone who is now watching us also for the next Live from DC program, which will focus on transitions to a green economy, and it will take place on February 17th. Also, of course, we are not only live, we are also recording, and all students and other Middlebury family participants are also invited to watch the episodes of the Meet Vantage series, Exploring Careers in Technologies New Frontier, which can be found on Center for Careers and Internships website itself. Look in events and programs tab. Thank you very much. I was Robert Siudak, hosting you here from Monterey. Thank you, Elia. Thank you, Mia. Thank you, Adam. Thanks, our students. Good night. Have a great and cyber secure evening.